If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, and if you enjoyed the channel, go ahead and give it a subscribe. Alright, now on to the episode. My Hero Academia Vigilantes. So yeah, we're doing My Hero Academia Vigilantes for our first series to cover. Now, you may be wondering why we're starting with the spin-off and not the mainline series, and honestly, the answer to that is a twofer. For one, this main series has been going on for quite a long time, and there's a lot to cover, and I really didn't want to be overly ambitious for a first try at this. What should I call this? I don't really know what to call it just yet. I'll think about it as we go. So anyway, the second reason is that I feel that if you clicked on this video, you probably already know about DEKU and Friends, but there's probably a subset that clicked out of curiosity, and my hope is to sate that curiosity. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of the series. For the most part, manga series have very rarely had spin-offs, as it's hard enough to really keep the mainline story popular and engaging. As such, only a rare portion of all manga out there actually have either an expansive enough universe to be able to support multiple characters, or be interesting enough that people would want a taste that is familiar but different. Even the more popular series out there struggle with spin-offs, as it's often characterized as some filler stuff that really is not worth your time. So in comes Vigilantes, where instead of following the ever-lovable DEKU, we follow a new group of individuals, with this series' main character being called Koichi, who's written by Hideyuki Furuhashi and illustrated by Betten Court, with the approval of Horikoshi, the creator of this universe, of course. Now, because this is a spin-off, all the rules of the mainline series still apply. There are still people with quirks, there are still laws surrounding the use of quirks, and there are still good and bad people using and abusing quirks. As a side note, one thing I really enjoy about quirks is that very often these quirks come with very specific activation conditions or devastating drawbacks, which makes their application a little bit more understandable and engaging. So just to get our feet warm with all this, I think this episode we're just going to look at the first volume, which is essentially the first 5 chapters, mainly because there's a lot of contextual stuff and exposition that we have to go through early on, but we'll be more ambitious as we go along. I do think that it would help a lot reading and understanding the series if you've actually read or watched My Hero Academia before, but I'll try to make it such that you probably don't need to do so just for the sake of listening through this video. Anyway, while the mainline story follows DEKU and his journey to become the greatest hero, Vigilantes follow both a different protagonist and a different timeline. In fact, through context clues, it quickly becomes obvious that this series happens about, the start of the series happens about 1 year before the start of My Hero. But let's jump in. So if you don't know what the definition of vigilante is, the story does make sure that you get it. Essentially, because there is a domino effect of hysteria if people can just use their quirk willy-nilly. For the most part, quirks and their usages in normal circumstances are not allowed. However, remember that roughly 80% of this world has some kind of quirk, big or small, dangerous or not. So if all of them went off at the same time, regardless of what they are, things can quickly get hairy. So we have Koichi, who's a college kid whose specific quirk is that if he touches the ground using 3 parts of his body, he's able to slide around at high speeds, sort of like one of those high-speed trains that exist in Europe and Asia, where they sort of hover but stick to a specific road. It's explained early on that his movement speed is roughly that of a bike, which sounds like it can be really fast or just barely faster than running, so that's a little confusing. While useful, the fact that he's almost always in that prepping phase before runners do their actual run in the Olympics, with the 2 hands touching the ground, and or conversely, he also sort of looks like a frog preparing to jump but not actually jumping. So that pose that he has to take to really move around makes him look really weird and creepy. Either way, Koichi idolizes heroes, and All Might in particular, whose powers make him the pretty much epitome of human physique. That said, Koichi knows his limitations, so he knows that he probably doesn't have the chops to be a true hero, so he settles with donning this All Might knockoff Halloween costume thing from time to time, just going around and helping people cross the street, picking up trash and stuff like that. So one day, while walking around in his casual clothes, he bumps into these three street toughs, I guess. 2 of them visibly have quirks, but the main leader, Thug, accuses him of damaging him in one way or another. You know how it is, and like you spill my water, so you have to pay for it, or something like that. And he essentially just tries to beat up Koichi until Koichi uses his powers to pretty much just slither away. Finally getting away, he passes by the performance of a so-called freelance idol called Popstep, who seems to have a quirk that lets her either float or fly. It's not really explained yet. Through Koichi's text bubbles, it's become obvious that Popstep is some sort of illegal street performer type, as she's done it in the past, and once again the police are coming to try and put an end to the show. Again, Koichi slithers away out of this scenario and avoids trouble. My boy eventually heads to his part-time job at this convenience store, but in comes the 3 punks from earlier who proceed to beat him, of course. Not sure how they hauled him out of the store without anyone seeing or without the manager saying a word, but sure, let's just go with it. He gets beaten black and blue by the leader dude who has spike power, sort of like that. Sort of like Miss Doublefinger from One Piece, and decides to boost his mental by doing his super secret community service thing. While helping around, Popstep notices him, recognizes him as the dude from earlier when they met, and sort of teases him. While parting ways though, she walks into the 3 street toughs and they try to pull their usual punk stuff. Koichi knows he's outmatched, but upon seeing tears on her face, he pulls out the small bit of courage within him and tries to intervene. Now, the suit that he's wearing is literally a Halloween costume pretty much. It's not some kind of super suit, so he's not stronger than earlier when he got beaten, so he gets beaten again. When it looks like the end of the road for our protagonist, he wonders if a real hero like All Might will come out and save him, dropping in from the sky, and don't you know it, a figure drops from the sky. Well, more like jump down a building, and it's definitely not All Might. Instead, it's this massive looking dude wearing a trench coat and a bandana's mask called Knuckle Duster, who seems to be looking for these blue tongue people or black tongue people, but proceeds to help Koichi out in beating back these thugs. This help is not without a cost, as it slowly becomes obvious to Koichi that he's going to get pulled into Knuckle Duster's world. This time around, as the thugs drag themselves out after being beaten, they get approached by this dude in a suit offering them meds, and you can bet your ass they take it. Well, the first 2 sidekick thugs take it immediately, but eventually all 3 of them do take it after some hesitation from the main spike dude. Knuckle Duster ends up sitting down in Koichi's room, uninvited of course, and explains his mission. So essentially, there's been this drug called Trigger that's been making the rounds, which pretty much powers up people's quirks, but also makes them more violent. Now, the drug doesn't necessarily send people into a frenzy directly. It's actually hard to tell if someone has a powered up quirk or was just born with a really strong quirk, so the only real way to tell if somebody has taken the drug is by checking their tongue is dark. Koichi brings up a valid point, which is why is it up to them to track down the drug instead of just passing the information along to either the police or to actual licensed heroes, and Knuckle Duster gives some half-baked reason as to why only they can. Honestly, at this point, the motivation for Koichi is kind of suspect, but he's the kind of guy that you can tell really gets easily swayed by others. Either way, Koichi ends up being this dude's apprentice, and as such, they go around the next day walking up to suspicious looking dudes and demanding to see their tongues. Now, let me just say that this is one of the worst ways to go about it. Again, this drug makes you more violent, but that doesn't mean that every violent looking dude out there is on the drug. So this is such an inefficient method to actually try and see where things are happening, but at this point you can really tell that Knuckle Duster has no leads. This is really just the only way that he has to go about things. It becomes pretty obvious that Knuckle Duster goes too far in his interrogation methods, and a wandering hero called Eraserhead decides to stop the vigilante. Now, Eraserhead is a mainstay in the mainline story, but for now, just know that his weapons of choice are these bandages that he can use to wrap and bind things, and his quirk is that he can temporarily shut down the quirk of anyone he's looking at. So if you know the type of personality that Knuckle Duster has, it's obvious that he won't just stop if somebody asks him to stop. So the two end up fighting. Now, Eraserhead is an experienced fighter, and I'm sure he's fought dozens of guys with the same type of power that Knuckle Duster has, as physical strength quirks are probably a dime a dozen in this universe, so he decides to use his quirk to cancel out Knuckle Duster's, but is surprised that nothing's changed, so it dawns on him. This dude does not have a quirk. He's literally just some normal guy running around punching people real hard. Now, during this fight, Koichi and Popstep, who joined up with the two earlier, are trying to chase down this suspicious looking dude with a briefcase, but run into the three thugs from earlier, again, now juiced up on power drugs. All these guys had power-ups. The lizard looking dude grew wings, the big fire dude can now full on breathe fire, and Mr. Spikes is now straight up a hedgehog, and Koichi does what he does best, run. During this chase, some stuff happens and the dude with the briefcase eventually gets knocked over, and out pops these little figurines from the suitcase. Of course, these aren't actually figurines but really containers for those super drugs, and the man panics and decides to inject himself with the thing. He of course goes haywire and grows into this giant Attack on Titan-esque being who just goes around wreaking havoc. He eventually grabs and throws Popstep, where we are then told that her power is never flight or levitation, but simply a quirk to leap really high, so her falling from such a height will kill her. Koichi does decide to step up and use his powers along a building's wall and zips up the face of it and launches himself off of it to give himself up as a thing for Popstep to hop off of, while also using his powers again when the giant tries to swat him in the air by launching himself off the giant's palm, landing in some trash which was conveniently there. Finally, Eraserhead does have the chance to look at the giant, thus cancelling his powers, bringing him down to size. Although everything does work out in the end, Eraserhead does tell Knucklehead, wait, what? Did I haven't called Knucklehead? I'm not going back. Knuckle Duster that he doesn't approve of his methods, but that he won't arrest him this time as he did help out. So from here we have a better understanding of our main trio. Koichi can glide on any surface at variable speeds on a 3D plane, meaning he can go vertically and horizontally. Popstep can hop off any surface and get some decent altitude, and Knuckle Duster is a strong dude, but he's just a dude. I guess the closest thing I can compare him to is Batman. I think the writer actually did do that comparison. He said like if All Might is Superman, then he wanted Knuckle Duster to be Batman. They share a similar physique depending on which iteration of Batman you read or watch, and the two don't have powers, but they do have a similar moral code, I guess. It's a little bit of a stretch because Batman does abuse his wealth, and it doesn't really seem like Knuckle Duster has any sort of wealth. Anyway, Chapter 3 does introduce us to Koichi's superhero name, the Crawler, which can I just say is an awful superhero name, and for the most part, everyone in this chapter does agree. He slides in to stop a fight between two delinquent with powers. There are some twists and turns, but at the end of the day, this is not really anything overly important to the plot. Chapter 4 did reveal us to the identities of the other two, at least somewhat from the trio. Knuckle Duster never really wore a mask, so just picture the same gorilla looking dude from before without a mask. We don't get his name revealed, but it's sort of clear that Koichi has come to accept his new reality. Then the dong gets dinged and this plain looking high school girl is at the door. Turns out that this is the real identity of Popstep. Now look, for the most part, much of the rest of this chapter was villain of the week material, but at the end of the day, when everyone is tired and dirty, Koichi does the laundry, and after letting them up to dry, he does genuinely feel happy to have people to share his otherwise lonely apartment with. Finally, for the last bit for today, we see that the police are also aware of the existence of Trigger and begin interrogating the various quote-unquote villains that Koichi and friends have faced so far, and overall really aren't able to learn much as of yet. Transitioning to Koichi, he's with Popstep, and the two are walking down the street when Popstep gets recognized by this fan named Quinn with an eye patch who asks to take a picture with her. Now, dear dummies, I'd like to be frank with you. How many times have you just walked down a street and seen someone with an eye patch? That's just firing signals that that person is trouble. Am I right, or did I just offend the eye patch wearing community? Anyway, after that, when they get apart, we get told that Quinn is actually a part-time villain, whatever that means. No, really. Being a villain isn't a 9-to-5 job, I get it, but referring to yourself as a part-time villain is just straight up weird. I mean, you're either a villain or you're not. It's not really that hard. Her quirk is the ability to control these bees with syringes, and from what I can tell, those bees' hive or nest is the eye socket that Quinn uses the eye patch to hide. Super creepy indeed. From her eye comes pouring out what are probably hundreds of bees, each having a dose of the super drug, and they go around stinging random civilians, amping up their quirks to dangerous levels. To contain this situation, an impressive group of the who's who of the heroes arrive on scene. We have All Might, Ingenium, Endeavor, as well as another slew of big names from the mainline series. And look, they do save the day, but while all of this is happening, Knuckle Duster caught one of the bees and realizes he finally has a lead, which is obviously the cliffhanger for this volume. So that'll put an end to this very first volume of My Hero Academia Vigilante. Look guys, this is not the MHA you all know and love, but it's similar yet different in a good way. The tone is a hint darker, especially true if you consider that Koichi is a college student while DEKU is a high school student. This is a little darker than the mainline story, but I'm really glad this exists. We haven't delved too deep into it yet, but the best part of this series you'll come to find out is that it also helps contextualize some of the characters who didn't quite get the limelight that they deserve in the mainline series. Anyway, this has been a first time for me, and I'm sure there's a lot to improve on, but I hope you'll stick around and come back for part 2, where we'll probably look at volume 2, and if we're a little bit more ambitious, volume 3. Alright, thanks guys. Feel free to leave a comment, give a like, subscribe, or any combination of the three. I'll see you on the next one. I'm off. He does genuinely feel happy to have people to share his otherwise lonely apartment with. Finally, for the last bit for today, we see that the police are also aware of the existence of Trigger and begin interrogating the various quote-unquote villains that Koichi and friends have faced so far, and overall really aren't able to learn much as of yet. Transitioning to Koichi, he's with Popstep and the two are walking down the street when Popstep gets recognized by this fan named Quinn with an eye patch who asks to take a picture with her. Now, dear dummies, I'd like to be frank with you. How many times have you just walked down a street and seen someone with an eye patch? That's just firing signals that that person is trouble. Am I right, or did I just offend the eye patch wearing community? Anyway, after that, when they get apart, we get told that Quinn is actually a part-time villain, whatever that means. No, really. Being a villain isn't a 9-to-5 job, I get it, but referring to yourself as a part-time villain is just straight up weird. I mean, you're either a villain or you're not. It's not really that hard. Her quirk is the ability to control these bees with syringes, and from what I can tell, those bees' hive or nest is the eye socket that Quinn uses the eye patch to hide. Super creepy indeed. From her eye comes pouring out what are probably hundreds of bees, each having a dose of the super drug, and they go around stinging random civilians, amping up their quirks to dangerous levels. To contain this situation, an impressive group of the who's who of the heroes arrive on scene. We have All Might, Ingenium, Endeavor, as well as another slew of big names from the mainline series. And look, they do save the day, but while all of this is happening, Knuckle Duster caught one of the bees and realizes he finally has a lead, which is obviously the cliffhanger for this volume. So that'll put an end to this very first volume of My Hero Academia Vigilante. Look guys, this is not the MHA you all know and love, but it's similar yet different in a good way. The tone is a hint darker, especially true if you consider that Koichi is a college student while DEKU is a high school student. This is a little darker than the mainline story, but I'm really glad this exists. We haven't delved too deep into it yet, but the best part of this series you'll come to find out is that it also helps contextualize some of the characters who didn't quite get the limelight that they deserve in the mainline series. Anyway, this has been a first time for me and I'm sure there's a lot to improve on. But I hope you'll stick around and come back for part 2, where we'll probably look at volume 2, and if we're a little bit more ambitious, volume 3. Alright, thanks guys. Feel free to leave a comment, give a like, subscribe, or any combination of the three. I'll see you on the next one. I'm off.